31st day, the last day of March 2024. Hope you're doing well. I'm Dana. Two Danas. Yeah, we get it, Dana. You're Dana. Durnford, also known as the nuclear proctologist. .org, and you can call in at 709-589-4406. I'll get it right at some point. Just give me 15 or 20 minutes, I'll figure this out. We're going to be talking about Sellafield. Sellafield has their fuel pools outdoors. There's no containment anyway, but what it means is all those farms, that's Sellafield there, all the farms surrounding it are being blasted with radioactive fallout because the fuel that's in the pools are still splitting atoms. This is why nuclear waste is so bad. And we got a poll. Should Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Britain, be charged with genocide for removing Fukushima baby food and cereal restrictions 2.5 years before he removed the restrictions for adults from the Fukushima nuclear meltdown prefecture? And 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima, were banned by 55 countries for a decade. And just imagine Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, removes the restrictions for baby food and for cereal, which is what the children are going to be eating typically daily, sometimes multiple times a day. And this is food from a nuclear wasteland. It's hard to comprehend it, that somebody could be that sadistic. And then 2.5 years later, just before he was ousted, removed the restrictions for the rest of the population. But the first restriction removals were for children and babies. That'll give you an idea how twisted the nuclear industry actually is in the United Kingdom. So everything else I tell you shouldn't come as a big shock. Even though it's a shock, trust me. Hope everybody's doing well. We got success, we got the batteries, and we got pictures and videos at the end of the show tonight. So I'm pretty happy about that, trust me. It's hard to comprehend what a relief that actually is. And that's the batteries for the boats, for those who are not familiar. Okay, so we're going to do a news cycle mostly on Britain. There's a couple of stories that I couldn't resist, so we'll cover them also. And away we go, I guess. UK nuclear cleanup site faces criminal cyber security charges. This is Sellafield. The largest, most hazardous nuclear site in the United Kingdom, maybe Europe. Well, I don't know if they can beat France. Just the La Hague in France. And Sellafield is reprocessing. It's a weapons site, so we'll get to that in a second. It violated security laws. Somebody will get a vacation for a couple of weeks with full pay, I guess. Sellafield has approximately 12,000 slaves and an annual budget of 2 million, I think it's supposed to be 2 billion pounds, which is 2.5 billion US dollars each year. And I can't remember. I done the math on this not that long ago, those types of numbers, and I can't remember off the top of my head, unfortunately. The site primarily processes and stores nuclear waste. Processes and stores. The only way you can process nuclear waste is if you're creating really toxic plutonium mixed oxide fuel, which is known as MOX, and is banned in most countries because it's so hideous. And it's the best way to get their hands on weapons grade material. But the pollution from it has been, we got a bunch of studies, not going to cover them tonight, but we've covered many times, that studies that quantify that these reprocessing facilities, radioactive fallout, has contaminated the Arctic and Europe. So imagine being surrounded by farms. You know, if the radioactive fallout, I'll put it on the bigger screen for everybody. It's just mind-boggling. The ocean is down here, but you got a community over right here. If the picture was a bit bigger, you would see the community. They always chop it off right there. There's 1,000 buildings on this site. This is it's unbelievable toxic. The emissions from these are unbelievable again, unimaginable, inconceivable really. And that in 1957, it was called Windscale, not Sellafield. And it had a nuclear meltdown at a plutonium mixed oxide fast breeder reactor. Which even today, and you can see the pipes going into the ocean, there's 8 million liters, 2 million gallons. But liters is a more appropriate way to look at it because it's so toxic by the liter. There's 8 million liters a day go into the ocean from the nuclear meltdown at Windscale, which is now known as Sellafield. He changed the name because of their crimes they had committed back then to try to shake off. The founding of Sellafield in a remote coastal location in northwest England dates from 1947. 57, 67, 77, 80, 90, 2007, 2017. So 75 years, 77 years of just polluting the environment. And it's just unconscionable that all of these places are always surrounded by farms. Because they're hemorrhaging radiation and the farms are very active. And that's how they get rid of the radiation buildup, the bioaccumulation in the area. Sheep, cows, and typical farms, right? It's just unbelievable that a facility like this, and I mean, they got the farms right up to the site. They got buildings on this site haven't been inside of 50 years that are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. They got open ponds full of reactor cores that they've never seen in 50, 60 years. They don't know what's in it. These are open, outdoor ponds of reactor fuel. And because reactor fuel is splitting atoms, which means these farms, just from that one facility alone, are going to be unimaginably contaminated. All nuclear power plants are doing the same thing. They're all surrounded by farms. It just boggles the mind that you're 77 years later and they're still doing it. And the two current nuclear power plants they're trying to build in the United Kingdom are surrounded by farms. Same as everywhere else worldwide. This is an agenda with the industry to exterminate us. And so when you zoom in, though, you're really able to appreciate how big this site actually is. 1,000 buildings. 1,000 buildings. 1,000 buildings dedicated to polluting your environment, the ecosystem, the biosphere. And so the farms are built right up to the property lines. This is on purpose, right? And what's in this mount, I wonder, that's on the property? Like, what's in that mount? And guarantee you that's not just a hill, because you can see how this facility, everything is taken up, right? So whatever's in this mount is going to be inconceivable, and it's right by the ocean. The ocean is right here. Well, the estuaries are right here, then the ocean is just downhill from there. So they didn't put it right there in this section, right by the ocean, accidentally. So when you look up at it and you look down at the coastlines, it's hard to comprehend that the whole thing is based up on how evil can they get. What's the most evilest thing they can do? And all nuclear power plants seems to have that same rule of thumb. How evil can we be? As far as you can see, farms. And this is where they're pumping 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic Ocean of unbelievable toxic radiation per liter from a nuclear meltdown that's still going on at Windscale. This is a shot of the ocean from the outside. But typically when they post a picture, it doesn't show you the farms, it shows you different sections of the site, right? And usually they're shooting up on an angle, so you don't get much land in the pictures. And so the farms and all the sites are always right up to the property lines, and there's always nuclear radiation hemorrhaging out of these sites. Sellafield nuclear site has a leak that could pose a risk to the public. Well, the whole site is hemorrhaging radiation. The fuel pools are all hemorrhaging radiation. The reprocessing of the fuel, like, it's hard to comprehend why they're so evil. Because you can't, first off, you can't use the nuclear weapons. Oh, I forgot to turn the audio down again, did I? It's hard to comprehend how actual evil this whole scenario that they're doing there actually really is. Europe's most hazardous nuclear site. Well, I don't know about Europe, because France is in Europe. And France has multiple reprocessing sites. The La Hague site in France, the reprocessing facility / disease factories, has 500 security guards. Not counting the workers, but 500 security guards. They really don't want you to see what they're doing, right? Has a worsening leak from a huge silo of radioactive waste. And because we don't cover enough, I decided today we better start. I got a whole bunch of studies coming up. Known as the B30 building, have caused diplomatic tensions with countries including the United States, Norway, Ireland, which fears Sellafield has failed to get a grip on the problems. The leak of radioactive liquid from one of the highest nuclear hazards in the United Kingdom, a decaying building at the vast Crumbian site known as the Magnox Wharf Storage Silo, is likely to continue to 2050. Another 26 years. Well, first off, if it's likely to continue to 2050, it's likely to continue for another 75 years. That could have potential because, let's face it, they're not trying to come up with a solution anywhere on the planet. That could have potentially significant consequences if it gathers pace, risking contaminated groundwater. Well, there's no way everything is not contaminated. There's no way. They can't contain it. I mean, they had a nuclear meltdown in 1957. That contaminated the entire country. I know when I'm talking about Britain, I'm supposed to have my pinky up in the air when I'm drinking, but not tonight. The cup I'm using is slightly too big for it. But there it is. Cracks have also developed in the concrete and asphalt skin covering the huge pond containing decades of nuclear sludge. Well, not all of them got that on it. It's their storage facility. Now, you can't go in the building, right? I don't suppose you can actually go near the building, but you can't go in those buildings. A fire in 1957 at Windscale, because that's what it used to be called, at the site was formerly known, was the United Kingdom's worst nuclear accident to date that they admit to. Because let's face it, nobody really knows, but if you look at the history of these people, then you got to assume the worst. Because that's appropriate, right? Let me see if I can, because we know I put together a video. put together a video. I think I got it. I did so. Look at that. So this is a video, and there's the documentary up there that I used to tell the story. Let me just play that. They kidnap people from the back rows of the theater to go into the nuclear meltdown.
The police from the factory had turned up looking for volunteers, and they brought a bus, and they decided the best way to get the volunteers was to go to the cinema and volunteer the back two rows at the show to go into the factory to, as it turned out, to help push the fuel rods out of the reactor.
So they didn't go to the universities looking for volunteers during the nuclear meltdown. They didn't go to other nuclear power plants or the nuclear corporations or the military. They went to the theaters and kidnapped the people out of the back rows. So 1947, the people who sat in the back rows of the theater were the poor, right? The rich sat up front. So then after doing that and that becoming public, they changed the name from Windscale to Sellafield, but they're the same place. This is one of the plume models. The radioactive cloud from Sellafield could reach the Norwegian coast in less than 12 hours. So this is 36 hours basically, and then imagine what 12 days is. Half the planet's covered in radioactive fallout. And they call these leaks. No matter what happens, it's going to be called a leak. It can lose the entire inventory, and they'll say a leak has caused the loss of the entire inventory. And there's no media out there will call it anything but. So first off, those plumes are always coming out because all the reactors, first off, anywhere, let alone United Kingdom, once they go through their first cycle of fuel, and that goes into the so-called fuel pools, there's no containment. And so the fuel is still splitting atoms for the next millions of years. And the same atoms, the amount of atoms that was to boil water for 1 million homes, is now being released. So every couple of years, they're putting more fuel in the pool. And after a few decades, you got multiple reactor cores. Each reactor core is for, say, 1 million homes, and it's splitting those atoms. So every couple of years, you're getting more atoms, but you're getting these plumes every single day. Every day there's that plume, right? So look at the 24-hour plume right here. So that plume will move, this way, but there's a constant plume. So think of an invisible cloud that covers the entire planet after the first fuel cycle goes in the pool about 2 weeks later, and it never stops, and every couple of years it gets worse because it adds more fuel. And there's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide doing that. And this is, you can do, and if you're honest about it, and you go back, you can see the decline of all the species post-nuclear industry. Startup, I should say. Post-nuclear industry startup. Once the industry started up and the fuel cycle, because we know Hanford in the United States dumped so much toxic, by the liter, like lethal levels of sludge, the splitting atoms, that's already gone through a chain reaction, into the soil. It was 450 billion gallons, which is equal to a 6-foot wide aquarium, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. Of just one site. So this Sellafield would have been comparable to that. And so this community has, and we'll show you the academic studies coming up, incredible cancers, clusters, and they don't know why. Obviously got nothing to do with nuclear industry, right, Dana? Well, wait a second. Why wouldn't you look at the nuclear power plants right alongside of it? the nuclear weapons facility right alongside it, the reprocessing plant right alongside of it. And the studies will that's what, they're not looking at the plant, they're saying it's a population mixing, or it was the common cold or something like that caused the leukemia clusters in children. And who's the most vulnerable of the population of humans? It's going to be the children, right? And so when they are the main cancer clusters, and you don't look at the nuclear industry, then you should be in jail for the rest of your life, shouldn't you? A Sellafield spokesperson / Windscale said, "We're proud of our safety records at Hillfield." Can you imagine that? A spokesperson? Oh yeah, no, we're proud of our safety record. Like what safety record? What are you talking about? And they give each other, they have these big banquets, the big awards presentations, and they give themselves awards to make themselves feel good, and so that their family looks at them as if they're actually good people. Obviously they're not, but the idea is to make them try to feel good about themselves, right? Big galas, everybody dresses in tuxedos and gowns, and they drink the best of the best champagnes and caviar. Obviously it's not cotton anywhere near Sellafield, but you see that same routine in all the nuclear industries worldwide. They do the exact same thing. Dirty 30s and his toxic siblings, the most dangerous parts of the Sellafield nuclear site. Well, in one sense, the most dangerous part of it is the farms, because they got 77 years of bioaccumulation of radioactive fallout. And the graveyards must be incredibly toxic in the United Kingdom because of all the radioactive people buried there. Cracks in the ponds holding highly radioactive fuel rods lead to safety fears. Every facet of Windscale / Sellafield has that particular attribute, right? Radioactive sludge, these are not words you ever want to hear. In the early 50s, a huge hole was dug in the Colombian coast and lined with concrete. Roughly the length of 3 Olympic swimming pools and known as B30. It was built to hold a skip load of spent nuclear fuel for a couple of weeks. And it's been there for 50-something years. When it was first put to work, it was designed to keep the fuel rods submerged for only 3 months, before reprocessing work was carried out. So they built 3 Olympic swimming pools for nuclear fuel, which is unbelievable. Why would you build that much? But it was only supposed to last for 3 weeks. Does anybody really believe that story? Like, there's no way you had that much sitting around, because it takes forever just to transfer a small amount to these facilities. A little thirsty tonight. I broke my diet. I went on a strictly vegetable diet about 2 weeks ago. I'm loving it too, by the way. And today is Easter, right? And so I ended up with an Easter dinner, a traditional Easter dinner. And I can't just go cold turkey. You got to have a bit of this and a bit of that once in a while. But I'm really like, one thing about the vegetable diet that I didn't realize was you don't need sweets or anything. When you got your salad toppings and stuff like that, you don't crave sweets after. Like a lot of meals, you'll crave some sweets. I'm pretty disciplined. Believe it or not, I'm actually disciplined. But with the vegetable diet, I noticed you don't crave sweets. I mean, my goodness, it's an incredible bonus. And you feel so much more energy. It's incredible, eh? When the B30 was first put to work, it was designed to keep the fuel rods submerged for only 3 months before reprocessing work was carried out. So why would you build 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools for 3 months only? Because you can imagine how much fuel you can put into a fuel pool. But then the 1970s miners' strike shut down coal power stations and forced everybody to rely on nuclear plants. Does anybody really believe that's how it happened? Don't you think it's the other way? The nuclear industry caused the coal to shut down stations so that they'd be stuck with nuclear power? And more spent fuel that could be quickly reprocessed was generated. Again, none of that makes sense because it takes a long time for the fuel cycle to end up in pools, right? And did the strike last forever? And debris from elsewhere within Sellafield was later added and the pond was abandoned. Abandoned. Outdoors. When new facilities were built in 1986. Clouding over and leaving workers on the site with little idea what lay beneath the murky waters. And that's 100% true. They don't, even today, they don't know what's in the ponds. Because the people that worked on it all died from leukemias and all kinds of other radioactive illnesses. Debris from elsewhere within Sellafield was added. A nightmare job with no blueprints. And this is one of the pictures. This is an outdoor pond that they have to add water to constantly because it boils off the water because the fuel generates the heat, right? And a lot of the fuel had turned to sludge. And so when they talk about sludge, it's actually fuel rods that have turned to sludge. It's just, it boggles the mind how this industry, it creates these concoctions and then they retire and they don't tell people what's there, so there's no urgency, right? And they don't get the blame. In fact, they're put on pedestals to get government jobs and everything else. And if the truth came out of what they'd done at Sellafield, they could never be in the public eye outside of contempt, right? It took 15 years and 1.7 billion sterlings or pounds to bring B30 to a point where decommissioning could begin several years ago. The decommissioning is probably going to go on for 100 years now because with builders limited to working only half an hour a day close to the pool to prevent them from exceeding radiation exposure limits. I got no idea what they're talking about. Because if you work in an environment where you're getting a severe dose in 1/2 an hour, then obviously the industry is corrupt, so you're getting a severe dose in 2 minutes or something is what's really going on. And their exposure limits are based on natural stuff, not man-made stuff. And this is how they're getting away with destroying humanity and the 8 million species, is when you look a little deeper, you realize that the criteria is based on natural stuff, not man-made anthropogenic radiation, fuel rods, based on bananas and potato chips. And so then they can get exorbitant amounts legally to the population because it's based on natural stuff, not man-made stuff. If it was man-made stuff, they couldn't put anything into the population. You couldn't use it in the hospitals. You couldn't transport it on the highways. And you could certainly not surround all these sites with farms as far as the eyes can see. Remotely operated vehicles normally used to help with submarine rescues were originally deployed but quickly failed, often within hours/minutes. So the remotely operated vehicles used to help with submarine rescues were originally deployed. I got no idea what they're talking about. Because how many times are you going to make that mistake? And every nuclear scientist would have known it was going to fail right away. And so it was a symbiotic. Sellafield hopes to have drained the pond by the early 2030s and demolish it by the 2050s. Hopes. That's the key word there. First off, you can't believe a single thing the nuclear industry tells you. You simply would be remiss. Although the reservoirs are still nicknamed the Dirty 30s, it was officially rebranded in 2018 as the first generation Magnox storage pond. But these are not storage ponds. These are abandoned outdoor nuclear fuel rod warehouses. I mean, it's Every time it rains, every time it snows, you know what's going to happen. These pools are hemorrhaging radiation atoms into the environment because fuel rods are splitting atoms. That's the problem with them. That's why they store them in pools. One of the major reasons, of course, is they got all this energy. They'll catch fire. But this is how they hide it from you, is what I mean by that. Is they put it in the pool is boiling off water, and you're talking about 120,000 liters a day typically. And each liter has enough atoms in it distributed out to give everybody on the planet a cancer. Because it only takes an atom to trigger an autoimmune crisis in your body. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells, eventually builds a sarcophagus around it. We call it a tumor, right? But it could take a year or 30, 40 years, but it's going to do that. It'll never stop attacking it with white blood cells. So it just destroys the whole ecosystem. And that ecosystem around here, by the way, is surrounded by farms. See, to me, it's heartbreaking. When I see a nuclear facility and all the farms, and I actually see the pictures, been at this forever, it still breaks my heart because of the harm and the damage that's going to be done from those farms alone. A 2016 image of the pile fuel storage pond, which is on a separate part of the site from the Magnox storage. So they got many different, they got buildings there they've never been in say 5 decades. But they got many sites like this all over the bloody place. It's 1,000 buildings, toxic buildings on this site. Now, B30 sits in a separation zone that requires greater security checks. Well, first off, nobody's going to steal fuel rods from a nuclear site because it's a lethal dose. You need a whole team of people, a special truck, you need cranes, it's a very slow process. It takes you many, many days. Highly visible. You're just never going to happen. And carries a higher risk of radiation than the rest of the town-sized site. Well, the energy the site uses is astronomical on its own. All of these sites need dedicated gas, oil, and coal plants, at least 2 of them, large ones. Although the B30 is the most notorious crumbling building on the Sellafield sprawling estate, it is far from the only problem child. Crumbling building is not the most notorious crumbling building. It's just the most it's the only one we really heard. But they have much more toxic buildings on that site they never mention, right? Nearby is B38, used to store highly radioactive cladding, zirconium cladding from the reactor fuel rods. It was also used heavily during the miners' strike in 1972, when nuclear plants were relied on to produce extra electricity, and it proved impossible to process all the waste that was being generated. And 2 years later, the public's view of the nuclear industry was sharpened by the launch of Protect and Survive advice on surviving a nuclear attack. 2 years later, the public's view was sharpened by the launch of the Protect and Survive advice. First, they can't use nuclear weapons. If you use the nuclear weapons, you won't have a cash machine. Society doesn't operate anymore. And they can't cash their checks anymore. The banks are not going to be operable anymore. The stock markets are all going to crash. They're going to lose all their money invested in the munitions factories. They simply can't have a nuclear war because it wrecks their whole economy built up on misery. Controlled area. Do not loiter near the West Pond side of East Washdown, as elevated levels of radiation are present in this area. Do not loiter near the West Side Pond. Don't loiter near anything like that. In fact, they got buildings on that site that if you have to walk past it, you have to run. You're not allowed to walk past it. You have to run or take a bicycle and ride past it quickly. Because of the gamma shines, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the X-rays. Windscale, a former munition factory. was selected to host a former munition factory. So they used to make the nuclear weapons there. Was selected to host the first atomic reactor, known as the Pile 1 and Pile 2, after the Second World War, and they produced plutonium for nuclear weapons. And efforts were rushed through to allow Britain to explode its own atomic bomb in 1952. Which was they went to Maralinga and Christmas Island, tropical paradises, and destroyed them. And I mean destroyed them. And Maralinga in Australia, they used to wait for the wind to blow towards Australia. And one of their bombs, and I mean, they really did have the science of wind down back then. And they put an incredible amount of effort into it too, by the way. And they would shoot up all the rockets and to figure out the wind. They would have airborne, seaborne vessels, weather stations, and everything else. So they really did have a handle on the wind. And in Adelaide, Australia, 1,200 kilometers away from Maralinga, the radioactive fallout was 90,000 counts per minute of gamma. Why would you go all the way to Australia to set off your nuclear weapons? A colony you created, Britain created, as a penal colony. So why would you go there all the way there to set off nuclear weapons? Why did you wait? Wasn't that contempt? Not only that, they done over 700 dirty bombs where they wrapped fission product from nuclear chain reaction and conventional explosives. A lot of it was plutonium, 239, 241. And then they would detonate them. And then they would have scientists go out and test the grass and the branches and the plants and the animals and the streams and everything for radiation. 700 dirty bombs. And it's still completely contaminated today. In fact, Maralinga, a bunch of islands off the coast of Australia, tropical paradise. It's still so radioactive, they don't recommend anybody go there for more than an hour. So, because they want you to think only as of shine, but the radiation wasn't created by shine, it was created by radioactive fallout, physical atoms, which means it's airborne today in a significant amount. The silo was first found to be leaking radioactive water. This is not radioactive water, this is radioactive sludge, into the ground in the 70s. In the 70s. 50-something years ago. The waste is stored underwater to prevent ignition. The water is incredibly toxic because the fuel that's in it is splitting atoms. Because it's gone through a chain reaction, it's very brittle, so it's full of trillions of microscopic cracks, which allows it to hemorrhage even more atoms into that water that is no longer water. And, you know, when you look at the nuclear industry, one of the things that have to come to your mind, are they attacking the water? Because without water, if you destroy the water, then no life can exist, right? You know, there is no life without water. Yeah, there might be some microscopic lives, but you still got to have water as far as I know. UK nuclear cleanup site faces criminal cybersecurity charges. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority and executive, back to that story, my apologies. And this is how that story got put together tonight, because it started off with that story, and then I went down the rabbit hole, and then I came back up to the surface and got a breath of fresh air, and then went back down the rabbit hole again. And now you're coming along for the ride. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, an executive non-departmental public body created by the Energy Act in 2004, estimated in 2018 that cleaning up the country's nuclear sites will take up to 2,120, 96 years or something, and a cost of at least 153 billion, of which Sellafield is going to be 115 billion. Cleaning up the country's nuclear sites will take until 2120. The year 2120. So 2120 from 2024 is 96 years, that's right. And cost at least 153 billion, which works out to 153 billion, 96 years is 1.6 billion a year. First off, 1.6 billion is not even a drop in the bucket per year to these guys. That's chump change to the nuclear industry in reality, right? And 90% of the money we know goes to administration. That's the consensus from the horse's mouth itself. So 90% of the money is going to go to administration. Only 10% of that money is going to go to the actual cleanup. And that's why it's going to take 96 years. The water. Hitting the water hard tonight. I'm going to have to jump up and grab some water in a minute. Which is $4.4 billion a day. So it sounds like a lot of money, and it is. That's a lot of money a day, right? But it's not a lot of money a day when you distribute it out across the country to all these sites. Now it's chump change again, right? If you spend it every day at Sellafield, you still can't put a dent in it. Because 90% of the money goes to administration, goes to wages. Goes to wages, goes to pensions, goes to health care, goes to bursaries for their children to get a free education and take over their jobs when they grow up. Stuff like that. 90% of the money goes to administration. Sellafield is expected to count for 115 billion. There's zero possibility you're going to clean Sellafield up at 115 billion. You get 12,000 employees. Just that alone is going to chew up the majority of the money each year. So what about the rest of the sites? Eh? Last month, and then you got to build, everything you build out of nuclear is 3 to 4 times more expensive than anything else. And it can never be used again. So all the precious metals you take to a nuclear site are lost from the ecosystem permanently. Last month, the U.S. security agencies and their Five Eyes, intelligence sharing alliance counterparts in the United Kingdom, Canada and Australia, like counting Canada, Australia, and New Zealand as some part of an intelligence agency, just doesn't even add up. Warned that a Chinese hacking group with the code name Volt Typhoon had gained a foothold in some victims' IT environment for at least 5 years. Like, first off, they would have done the same thing to China. And they would have been there for 50 years. Appears to be repositioning for future disruptive and destructive attacks. Well, there's many examples of where they use this rhetoric to invoke fear into politicians to get more money thrown their way, because they have very exorbitant expenses for this industry, and they're always cooking up ways to how would you put it? I wonder, extort money from the taxpayers, I guess is the best way to think of it. UK government urged not to bury nuclear waste under national parks. Remember that story from a few years back? What year was that? Because we covered it. It was a big hoo-ha. Like, just like, try wrapping your mind around that statement. UK government, Britain, urged not to bury nuclear waste under national parks. So national parks, in most people's eyes, are just paradises that are being preserved, right? But the majority of the parks appear to be highly toxic sites where they dump nuclear waste over the years, and now they just, because it can't be used for anything else, they're calling it a park. Like Rocky Flats, what they done at Rocky Flats, for instance, and because Rocky Flats and Rocketdyne that used to. There was all kinds of toxic emissions going on there, and the FBI had to go in there and close it down because of the crimes they were committing. Then they spent enormous amounts of money on administration and a little bit on cleanup. And then they turned it into a park, like hiking trails and stuff like that. And there's a lot of groups out there, went out there with Geiger counters, and there's no way they would let their family members go out there. So therefore nobody else should be going out there. But, off San Francisco, they dumped 55,000 45-gallon drums off an island out there, and then they turned that area into a park, for instance. In January, the government restarted its attempts to find a community willing to host such a facility after a previous search collapsed 5 years ago. And what it is they'll put it in such a controversial place, there'll be a whole lot of outrage, and no, we're doing it, we're still doing it, and they'll keep that rhetoric going for several years, and they'll say, okay, you win, we're not going to do it. And then they'll so-called regroup, but the idea is not to come up with a solution. They'll try to put it in people's community, then they'll have a referendum. And that's the only times you'll ever see referendums in nuclear, is when they want to put a nuclear dump in a community, because they know the community is going to say no. And so they'll spend all this money, they'll throw money around, they got all this money sitting in a bursary, many billions of dollars, and then the interest every day on that is incredible. And that funds their whole scam. And they don't want to come up with a solution. They can't come up with a solution. It's on purpose, because everything needs to be vented all the time. You can't contain this stuff. There's the illusion you can contain it, but over the years what we discovered repeatedly was that everything is vented. And so this is a genocide machine, an omnicide machine. Ministers have refused to exclude national parks from the process. Ministers. Most useless species we got. Look Britain's nuclear veterans in the eye, Prime Minister, I'll get it right in a second, and tell them that they're imagining the cancers and the heart problems, the liver problems, the lung problems, respiratory problems, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline problems, the Alzheimer's, dementia, the autism, the diabetes, the Down syndrome, the schizophrenia, from the radioactive poison. Look them in the eyes and tell them. In 1952, Winston Churchill gave the order to detonate Britain's first atomic bomb. Just 7 kilograms of plutonium destroyed the HMS Plym, while it laid moored off the uninhabited Montebello Islands on the northwest coast of Australia, which is still today, 70-something years later, too radioactive to go there. And all that remains, because we covered that story last year or the year before, remember that? All that remains of the hurricane, Operation Hurricane, was a landscape littered with radioactive metal fragments, and the frigate's shadow burned onto the seabed. So the shadow of the frigate was burnt into the seabed, is what they're saying. How crazy is that statement? But it wasn't just radioactive metal. It was, so what they discovered back then in those days was that the salt water, when you put extreme heat to it, liberates the salt, and the salt is in these spherical balls, it looks like kind of like a soccer ball, and it can ingest the uranium, the plutonium, the americium, the neptuniums, the strontiums, the curiums, the radioactive iodines, everything else. And those spherical balls, which is known as sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs, will become super hot particles, and they're liberated quite easily back into the environment. They're typically not solutable in water, so they're always floating around. You breathe them in, the animals breathe them in, or they can assimilate into plants and pollen and everything else, and insects and larvae. But they're very powerful emitters. And so once they're in the insects and stuff like that, they start to sterilize them. Same thing with humans. But they're all considered very hot particles. And so doing detonations in salt water, because you're going to cook so much sulfur, You're going to create so much radioactive material. It's mind-numbing, the damage that it does over the long term. And it never goes away. It'll be here long after the human experience. We might as well buy every Brit an ostrich than spend billions more on the tridents. What was the number? I can't remember, because I remember the story when we covered it. It was $170 billion or something. $170 billion on weapons you can't use. Hi, everybody. We got, should Boris Johnson be charged with genocide for removing Fukushima baby food and cereal restrictions? So, $170 billion for nuclear weapons. So divide that by 4 million. Because you can do a megawatt of geothermal for $4 million. So that's 42 large nuclear power plants worth of renewable energy of geothermal. So that's enough energy for 42 million people. Enough geothermal energy for 42 million people. They're going to burn it on the despicable nuclear industry. They're ridiculous. And they can't use the weapons. And we have, and even back then, I said the same, you probably remember, quite a few have been around for a long time, was just build a nuclear weapon, but don't make any nuclear. You don't need it. You can't use it. If you do use it, even if you're attacked and you used it, you destroy everybody's future, including yourselves. So you can't use it. So 42,000 megawatts with the same money they were going to use for just the nuclear weapons alone. Which is what they're doing, right? They're doing it anyway. The Windscale fire, Britain's Chernobyl, which was covered up for decades. Well, Windscale was worse than Chernobyl because it was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor, and Chernobyl was a graphite reactor. Chernobyl is not, 600 kilometers from the ocean, whereas Windscale is right on the ocean, and Windscale is surrounded by farms. Britain's Chernobyl, which was covered up for decades, spewed radioactive dust into surrounding Colombian countryside. We're not even to the studies yet. We must be getting there. The Windscale fire remains the UK's worst ever nuclear accident. Dounreay was their reprocessing plant, but they got that in Scotland, right? But that's still the United Kingdom's reprocessing facility. And it's going to take them 315 years, they say, to make that usable again. And what they done there was at Dounreay, they just dug really deep pits and dumped their nuclear waste down there. Like literally, these people are like baboons. But its chilling memory is mostly consigned to the history books. A catastrophic meltdown was averted by the heroic actions of a few people. Well, the catastrophic meltdown was not averted. They were not properly recognized for their efforts. No, because they weren't recognized for their efforts because they didn't avoid the meltdown. 1957, uranium fuel at Windscale plant in Crump, now known as Sellafield, overheated and caught fire, setting in motion a terrifying series of events. And to show you these pictures, but see these birds up there? Bear with me. Yeah, cattle here. Which is, you do see some pictures later. You won't see any more pictures of birds above their nuclear plants or our nuclear plants, will we? But when I zoomed in on the birds don't make any sense to me. And it looks like a lot of them were just copy and paste. Who knows? The one thing I know is you don't trust anything the media tells you, the nuclear industry tells you. And the nuclear industry uses 90% of its money for administration. And that's why it's falling to pieces, is because you're just looting everything. So here's the official story they tell you is totally different than the real story that came out decades later. After kissing his family goodbye and telling them to keep the windows closed, the 39-year-old rushed to the plant less than a mile from his home. So, like, closing your windows is not going to protect your family. In an act of incredible bravery, he donned protective gear, a pair of coveralls, before climbing 80 feet in the concrete shaft to sat atop the number 1 nuclear pile to get a better understanding of the situation. So he was called in. They thought that they were having problems with the reactor, but they didn't know what was going on. And to his horror, he peered down and saw an unusual red glow, revealing the uranium was burning at an astronomically high temperature inside. Now, if you add water to these temperatures, they'll detonate, right? You know that. Everybody knows that's common sense. 11 tons of uranium were ablaze. There you go. Bear with me here. I'll just duck you, but I guess my little eye went backwards on me. 11 tons of uranium was ablaze. 11 tons. 22,000 pounds. Which is a lot more than the 7 pounds you use at Montebello Island, isn't it? So this is people from the theater they kidnapped at gunpoint on buses and brought them to Windscale to push the control rods or the fuel rods out of the reactor, what's known as the pile. So this is not nuclear scientists or nuclear academics or nuclear corporations, or this is the homeless, basically. This is the victims of society that were in the back rows of the theaters. When I looked up people taken from theaters to put out fires at UK Windscale nuclear plant, they didn't find any results whatsoever. I played the video for you there a little bit earlier, right? I can do it again if you really want me to. I don't really want to, but I guess if you're going to demand it like that, I'll play it again. Here we go. Let's play it again. This was a documentary for one of the people.
The police from the factory had turned up looking for volunteers, and they'd brought a bus, and they decided the best way to get the volunteers was to go to the cinema and volunteer the back 2 rows at the show to go into the factory to, as it turned out, to help push the fuel rods out of the reactor.
These are maniacs. The cow's milk was taken from a 500-kilometer area next to Sellafield. Well, as you see in the pictures earlier, everything's surrounded by all these nuclear disasters are surrounded by farms. It was diluted 1,000-fold. Well, you can't dilute radiation. All you can do is spread it, because you can't even destroy radiation in an incinerator. So, putting it in cow's milk or diluting it is not going to destroy it. It only takes one of these atoms to inflict an autoimmune trigger in your body. It was diluted 1,000-fold, dumped into the Irish Sea, leaving it partially contaminated. No, leaving it contaminated. Editors at the media are not there as your friends, okay? They say only 20,000 curies of radioactive material were released into the environment, but they just told you it was 11 tons, 22,000 pounds. So 20,000 curies is simply not true. There's 120 curies in a gram. Let me see what the official numbers are. Hang on. I'll bring it up for you. Because that's kind of important that we make sure you're able to articulate it if you feel so. So Curie's 37 billion atoms. So Curie is 37 billion atoms. Strontium, cesium has 88 Curies. Strontium 90 has 140 Curies. So potassium 40, like bananas, is 71 10 millionths of a Curies per gram. Whereas strontium 90 is 140 times 37 billion per gram. So let's bring up a calculator. 22,000, was it? Curies divided by 140 Curies per gram. And divide that. Did I get that right? Yeah. And then divide that by 29 to get ounces. 5.4 ounces. So it's not even a pound. 5.4 ounces. But you had 22,000 pounds on fire, burning continuously for days. But it only released 5.4 grams. So how can you boil water with such a tiny amount? Because you can't, see? The whole industry is just, it really is disgusting. That seems to be the only thing they're good at, is being disgusting, right? And so when they equate and conflate potassium 40, first off, you can't make a dirty bomb out of potassium 40, let alone a nuclear chain reaction. It just simply doesn't work that way. It's homeostasis, is natural. Everything is acclimated to it through genetic superior selection. It's stardust. We live in harmony with it. We can't live without it. It's natural. And so by using that, though, that causes the confusion for the average person trying to. And if you go down the road on your own and you're trying to work out what this means or that means, or this stuff means or that stuff means in the nuclear industry, you get nowhere. Well, you'll get propagandized to the point where you're going around saying it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine. You're completely disconnected from the truth. So these buildings had 6 million pounds of pure uranium, pure plutonium, minimum each. That's reactor 3 at Fukushima. And it ejected the 6 million pounds of decades of reactor cores into fuel pools and the reactor core several kilometers up into the air, and big chunks of it, like the cranes and that, felt, you can see them in the videos falling back down to Earth. And officially, they got all the fuel out of the pool on that day, but they're saying they done it in 2021, right? But it all came out on the 5th day, the 21st, or the 16th of March 2011. Over the hills from Windscale. This was an old study. I think we're going to get into a bunch of... we still got a few more stories. But still got a bunch of studies to get to. Tomorrow night, we got a bunch of studies from Chernobyl I want to cover, because that's what I was doing today in my spare time. And I have a battery drain on my truck, right? And I went out to track it down today with the multimeter, and I set it too high. And I know better, right? I set it too high, and I cooked my multimeter, because my multimeter that I had was a cheap one that doesn't have a fuse in it. Oops. And I cooked it. So now I got to get another multimeter before I can track that down. I was pretty disappointed in myself. I still had a lot of work to get done anyway, but that was kind of important for me today. So I went through a lot of work to set everything up, and then I cooked it. That's the way it goes. The next multimeter, because I can't do very much without a multimeter for the stuff I'm doing, for maintenance on electronics and everything. I still got to do the whole electronics on the boat yet, right? I got everything. So I'm in good shape for that. I just got to get another multimeter. I'll get there. Then the rising concentrations of radioactive iodine in local cow's milk caused the Ministry of Agricultural, Fisheries and Food to stop its sales. And soon the area of the milk ban was extended 200 square miles downwind of the factory. It was 500 square miles, I think it was, they said earlier, right? Another story. Some of the affected milk had already been distributed, of course. Like, you got to realize in 1957, back then, they really didn't give a shit back then. This story is more about hiding the history, right? Because back then, they didn't give a shit. They really, they didn't have mass communications. People didn't have TVs. The radio was strictly for propaganda, for the war machines. They had co-opted everything and turned it into evil, and there was no way to have a future. The military and the government conspired to take everything that could be used to better society and weaponized it against society. And it wasn't greed, it was just evil. It was even more surprising no standstill order was imposed to ban the movement to the catalytic affected areas. So you weren't allowed to drink the milk, but you can sell the cows to somebody else, the radioactive cows, and then they can sell the milk somewhere else. Cows were freely sold from the auction marks and were moved to various other parts of Britain. This is just one of the many atrocious betrayals. And the Ministry of Agriculture, you can imagine what they were like in 1957, declared that those cows would be automatically deemed safe after 24 hours grazing on so-called clean land. Well, there was no clean land once the nuclear testing / war started. Because nuclear testing is a nuclear war. It just wasn't declared, right? It's the same weapons, the same radioactive fallout. And they used a lot more weapons than they would have used in the war, right? After 24 hours grazing on clean, it was the Bikini Atoll, for instance, not Bikini Atoll, but the Marshall Islands. They called it the Bikini Atoll to confuse people, but the Marshall Islands was equal to Hiroshima, Nagasaki rather, a plutonium bomb, every day for 12 years. The fallout. Still 1 million square kilometers in 2019, too radioactive to be habitable. So the cows were taken out, moved to hundreds of miles away, and then once they ate the local grass for 24 hours, they were deemed safe to sell or eat, right? When they absolutely could never be safe, right? Every time you look at the nuclear industry, this is what you're finding. Every single step of the way, their entire legacy is exactly how do we poison the population. That arbitrary decision implied that the easiest way to deactivate a cow was to move it out into another area. The Royal Navy is having real trouble disposing, this United Kingdom, the Royal Navy is having real trouble disposing of its old nuclear submarines. Well, the Royal Navy has a get out of jail free card when it comes to radiation. Britain isn't the only nation, by the way, that has problems disposing of nuclear warships. Every country does. Britain has retired 20 nuclear submarines since 1980. None have been disposed of, and 9 still contain radioactive fuel in their reactors because they never built a way to get it out. Right? There was no. When they built these reactors in these submarines, the cooling system is outside the reactor, right? But the reactor was supposed to design to run its life, and there was no way to get the fuel out. Britain spends $646 million maintaining the decommissioned subs between 1980 and 2017. Decommissioned. They're not decommissioned, though. Full disposal of a nuclear sub would have cost £96 million. As a result, the total cost for disposing of the Navy's 10 active subs and 20 retired vessels, nuclear vessels, would be £7.5 billion, $10 billion US. Fuel removal ceased in 2004 after the British nuclear regulators found the removal facilities didn't meet the standards. So why didn't they come up with something? The department pays an estimated $15 million a year to maintain and store the 9 fueled submarines currently stored in Davenport. And quite a few of them are hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem. Interestingly enough, the British military gets an exemption when it comes to nuclear waste. So the British military is exempt from polluting the ecosystem, the environment, your drinking water, your air, your communities, your cities. So where's the incentive not to be evil, say? Like, why would you do something like that? Again, it's an admission that they can't clean it up, but they can certainly make it with no thought about how to deal with it, and they couldn't care less about you anyway. They couldn't care less about you. The Soviet Union sank 19 nuclear vessels because they're trying to take some weight off their shoulders, so they puke up this narrative, which is good. I'm glad they did, but that's all. The only reason they're doing it is to take some heat off their shoulders, right? The Soviet Union sank 19 nuclear vessels and 14 shipborne nuclear reactors at sea. That's quite depressing. The Soviet Union actually has 18,000 nuclear dumps ranging over a huge area in their territory in the ocean. Up by the Arctic, actually, right? And the occurrence of radioactive fallout over Norway as a result of the Windscale accident in October 1957. I didn't have the date on that one, I apologize. The cloud of contamination passed to the southeast of England before travelling northwards on the 14th of October as a result of the weather fronts in Europe. Monitoring the radioactive fallout in Norway was at the time conducted by the Norwegian Defence Research Establishment, which is a Norwegian research institute. What is it? Norwegian Radioactive Research Institute? I can't remember off the top of my head for some reason. The cloud of contamination wasn't a cloud, it was a continuous plume. In 1957, a fire in the graphite moderators, one of the air-cooled plutonium production reactors. This was a breeder reactor. At Windscale, now called Sellafield because of the crimes they committed, to change the name to try to... and so Windscale, April, which is next month, the 28th I think it is the anniversary of Windscale and the Kyshtym, which was the Soviet Union, was you know it as the MOYAC, right? A double anniversary. 29th of September, oh, that's September, that's right. April is Chernobyl, my mistake. 29th of September 1957 in southern Urals, then part of the Soviet Union, when loss of coolant to a storage tank containing high-level liquid waste in a nitrate at the MOYAC nuclear complex resulted in chemical explosions. Nuclear explosion. And 740 petibecquerels of fission products were released from the containment, of which 10% was dispersed to the atmosphere. I think a lot of it went into the Tetcher River. The two accidents have one thing in common. They both occurred at installations whose main purpose was to produce plutonium for their respective national weapons programs. On this basis, the contaminated area extended 300 kilometers downwind of the accident site and comprised an area of... They cut that off. Well, first off, these plumes always cover the entire planet. Let me give you a little demonstration of how a plume actually works. And it takes me a minute and a half, give or take 5 minutes. Oh yeah, right. I better do that. Sorry, here we go. So like Fukushima is a prime example. So buildings blow up, that's reactor 4, it's completely gone. There's reactor 3, that's completely gone. And then the radioactive fallout, this model is based on France's government's model of 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137. And I think this is a 30-day model. Yeah, this is a 30-day model. But we're approaching day 20 of the tsunami, 15 days after the last reactor blew up right there. So the plume covers the whole planet at up to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air, of just cesium-137. But when you're talking about cesium-137, you typically want to think of it as 100 times more strontium-90 for every cesium-137. And that's reactor 3 and 4 reactors. They had fuel pools at the top of them. So did reactor 1 and 2. They're gone also. So you had 1, 2, 3, 4 reactors that are way larger than Chernobyl. But Chernobyl is considered worse than all these reactors combined because they don't want you to realize what these reactors represent, right? So they keep telling you, trying to reinforce that Chernobyl is the worst accident. But how can one reactor, which was a graphite reactor, a small reactor, a new reactor, with no fuel pools in the upper parts of the buildings or in the buildings, versus 40-year-old buildings with 40 years of reactor core stored in 2 fuel pools, and the reactor cores at the top of the building is completely gone. So putting Chernobyl in that category shows you the industry is a total degenerate. It's a total scumbag industry. Just to say it once, but they say it constantly all the time because we cover the news cycles typically, right? Some 1,154 persons were evacuated from most severely affected areas within the 7-10 days. But even so, this group is estimated to receive an effective dose of half a sievert. So, like, we're not talking about, see, a sievert typically employs energy. So if you're walking past fuel storage and it's pulsing energy, that's what you would describe the typical sievert at, right? Like, it could be on another side of in a contained building, but it's pulsing through the building and you're getting hit with this energy, and which melts your organs. Type energy, and there's permanent damage. The organs keep melting over the next short while. So this was a release, though, of a plume, physical particles and atoms. So the 0.5 sieverts meant you were breathing in physical atoms. And so they hid that by describing it as half a sievert, or 0.5 sievert, rather. So they describe it, or half a sievert. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose right away, by the way, just from energy. So you can't describe radioactive fallout as microsieverts or millisieverts or sieverts. You have to describe it as physical atoms, and atoms, they'll pulse energy almost at the speed of light every second. A gamma pulses at around 600 feet. It'll pulse right through your house, your neighbor's house, and then radiate you in the other side of your house every second. So it sterilizes all the species in the forest on top of that. So 0.5 sieverts prior to the evacuation. So first off, you would have to strip off all your clothing before you get on the bus, or the bus is going to be incredibly radioactive. You can't take anything. Like, they should shave everybody's head before they gets on the bus. It's that you're that radioactive when you're talking about these numbers of physical particles. So everything has to be, your IDs, everything has to be thrown away before you get on, you evacuate. And then whatever vehicle you're using to evacuate, that has to be sequestered for 1 million years after. It can't be used in the population ever again. Nuclear is the stupidest industry imaginable. And its whole entire existence is predicated upon deceit and dishonesty and deception and misrepresentation and basically bald-faced lies. The disposition from the Windscale accident was dominated by IDON 131. That's simply not true. That's simply the most dishonest statement conceivable. And that's a vicious lie. That's an outrageous lie. And whoever the academic was that put that there should lose their degree and should do 10, 20 years in jail for making these types of assertions. It's that egregious. Windscale radiation spread further than emitted. Well, radiation has no bounds. Like this model of the Neptunium-239, which, by the way, decays to plutonium-239, is based on 20 days, I think. Yeah, 20 days, that one over there. And this one is the 1st of April. So that one over there is based on the 31st of March, which is today. This is March the 31st, right? So March the 11th, the accident happened. And by today, March the 31st, the radiation's covered the entire planet. 20 days later. But that model is based upon venting, but there was everything melted down. I showed you the pictures. There was nothing vented. It was nuclear meltdowns. And even today, the average person doesn't understand that's reactor 3. No concept that is reactor 3. No concept that exists. And zero expectations that the population knows that exists. Windscale radiation spread further than emitted. Spread across to northern Europe. Spread not northern Europe, across the entire planet. That's how radiation doesn't just go across a piece of the country. Like gas, oil, and coal emissions don't create any models and plumes. That's the Norwegian Institute of Air Research. No, that's datapoke.org. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't create plumes like this. And so they want you to believe carbon emissions, which you can't have trees or plants or insects or birds or mammals or animals or biota or life. We look like the moon without carbon, right? We can't exist without carbon. Carbon's good. More carbon, the more species. But everything you do is carbon intensive because that's just life. It's recycled back into the ecosystem. Carbon is quickly sucked up by plants and trees, and it's not like it's bad. It's good for them, right? They can't grow without carbon. And so radiation is the only models where you see plumes that covers the entire planet. That model is based on 20 days. And so you got an invisible plume covering the entire planet after 20 days. It never goes away. It never stops coming out. It's always getting thicker. It's always getting more. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second for millions of years. And that's what climate change is. It's 80 years of radioactive emissions that never go away and have bioaccumulated every day for 80 years. And you got 1,000 fuel pools worldwide making a plume like that every day, by the way. It's hard to comprehend it. How insidious and dangerous and urgent it is to stop this industry. We have to stop this industry. At some point, we're going to stop it. At some point, we have no choice. Windscale radiation, just want to do it now. Windscale radiation spread further than emitted. Science and trans science and radiation risk assessment. Child cancers around nuclear fuel reprocessing plants at Sellafield, United Kingdom. The assessment of health risk to the population from radionuclide environment is a complex and as yet incomplete science. It's 1986, but it's to suggest that it's it's an incomplete science is so far from the truth. Hang on, bear with me. So the show for tomorrow, and I got some of it already imported. Let me go backwards. It's hard to comprehend this industry. Let me go down. Right, let me take 12 studies. I'm just going to grab 12 studies. This is from tomorrow night's show. But when they talk about incomplete science, let me show you what how the science actually works. So, 1997, complex approach to mental disorders after Chernobyl accident estimations. So this is all the stuff. This is just a fraction. Not even a fraction of 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 a percent of the studies that they do each year. Radiocesium accumulation from Chernobyl fallout nestlings. 1999, a flycatcher population in Norway. Assessments and influences of Chernobyl on birth defects, abortion rates in Australia. A study of hot particles collected in Sweden 1 year after Chernobyl. The intellectual development, mental and behavioral disorders in children from Belarus exposed in utero following the Chernobyl accident. So why are they studying all these weird stuff? And like tomorrow night, I'm going to take you, just to give you an idea of the kind of studies that this industry does, and then you'll be able to appreciate the harm from this stuff, because they're doing this stuff because it's harmful, see? They're doing these studies of fallout because there's a demand for the knowledge, because they know they've done the damage, right? But they need to most of the studies are done to downplay it, by the way. Plutonium, other alpha emitters in bones of wild herbivorous animals from northeastern Poland. So when it's in the bones, it's mutating the stem cells. So if it's in the bones of animals, it's in the bones of the children. It's in the bones of the insects, or the birds and the mammals and the animals, and anything, even anything with cartilage is going to have it. Evaluations effects of chronic exposure to cesium on sleep-wake cycles in rats. So they studied the facets, every facet of nuclear, then many times magnitude orders, than stardust, the stuff that makes up Earth, the man-made stuff. Because the stuff from a nuclear reactor doesn't come from the solar system. It's not created by the sun. Influence of agricultural countermeasures on the ratio of different chemical forms of radionuclides in the soil and soil solutions. Agricultural countermeasures, influences of agricultural countermeasures and the ratio of different chemicals. So they're talking about trying to quantify that they can make radioactive farmers' fields safe by using countermeasures, but it doesn't work that way. The radiation is assimilated the same as calcium or potassium into the plants, see? And so they want to hoodwink you thinking that if you add potassium, you displace cesium. Because when you only talk about cesium, then you're one-dimensional, because there's 1,000 dimensions to nuclear, right? There's uranium and plutonium and americium, neptunium and strontium and curium and iodines. There's krypton. There's so many isotopes and so many of their daughters. Like there's only one stable iodine 131, there's only one stable iodine daughter. All the other iodine isotopes are anthropogenic. The potential for disease initiation by inhaled beta-emitting nuclear particles, or alpha-emitting nuclear particles, or gamma-emitting nuclear particles. Radiation contamination after Chernobyl accident and the effects dose received by the population of Croatia. The whole population, they're doing looking at the doses the whole population received. Why are you doing these studies? Because they received a dose, and a significant dose. You know, after 3 Mile Island, they said 2 million people got irradiated, but it was equal to watching color television for an extra year, because color televisions was a novelty back then, right? 79. But you can't conflate color televisions with radioactive poisoning. But that's what they went and done. Individual dose due to radioactivity accidentally released from fusion reactors that don't even exist, a hypothetical. But when I remember there was this one period where I went way down the fusion rabbit hole, because I figured out how to find a whole bunch of studies on it. And every one of them was terrified of the massive amount of tritium going to be produced, because tritium can't be contained. And we're talking about tritium-3H, not natural tritium from the solar system, which they conflate together, obviously. We're talking about actual man-made anthropogenic tritium-3H. And how many times have you heard Fukushima mention the word tritium-3H? You hear tritium 10, 20, 30 times a story, but you won't hear tritium-3H, because that's what's actually we're talking about. I think I'm going to get one. This is the last one. Seasonal variations, radiocesium concentrations in willow ptarmigan and rock ptarmigan in central Norway after Chernobyl. Seasonal variations, radiocesium concentrations in willow ptarmigans and rock ptarmigans in Norway. 1999, because back in 1999, a lot of people were still out hunting ptarmigans, right? Like I grew up in a place that has no automobiles, and yet the supermarkets didn't have refrigeration, basically. And so our refrigeration was ice pack in the wintertime, would be taken out of the ocean and put in the storage for the summer, right? So it was this blue ice, beautiful blue ice. And you also would put it in your wells, right? You would leave it outside, let the rain wash all the salt off it and any snow on it, stuff like that off it, and then it went in your wells. Because we had wells, right? It was all rocks. The whole community is built on stilts. And so it was a unique way to grow up, right? Every day, growing up, my job was to go get water from the well every morning before school, right? And so my neighbor, Fudges, had these two geese, these two bullies. And so in the wintertime, the little trails, because there's no roads, no cars or nothing, so you take these little trails to your well, and you take the trail back. And so because you're lugging water, the trails are going to fill up with ice eventually, right? And so these two geese understood you didn't have traction. And so we didn't like each other, me and the geese. And we get into it every single morning. And my neighbor would yell, "Don't make them mad." And it was too late. Because they didn't like me. They would run after me. And they hurt, right? When they grab onto you, they pinch you. That hurts. And so every morning when I used to go to school, my bottom of my pants were frozen from spilling water on myself, right? And so there was always a puddle of water around my seat in school. And it wasn't me peeing myself or something. It was my pants legs thawing out because I had ice build up on them from lugging water every morning. You can imagine, I was this little scrawny little kid, and say 12 years old, and I'm carrying a 50-pound bucket in each hand of water twice each morning back to my house on this icy path. But because I lived a different life than most people would live. And so when I was 13, because the amount of work I was doing, I asked for several things. I asked for a charge account for cigarettes. Hear me up before you make opinions on it. So I had a charge account for cigarettes, a charge account for beer. I'll tell you the story. A charge account for cigarettes, a charge account for beer, and a charge account for gasoline. I had a 15 Johnson brand new outboard motor and a little 10-foot flat skiff. So it was a flat bottom skiff. So I would fly with a little 15 on it and a little scrawny kid like me, right, at 13. And I had 3 guns. I had a 22, a 12 gauge, and a 303. And so I had a shell accounts too. And my job was after school, was to go and get birds, get ducks, get partridge, get crows, get rabbits, get food, right? And it was very innocent in many ways, right? Well, in every way, really. And another thing was that when I was 13 in school, I had an ashtray on my desk. So when I was going to school, the first thing you done in class was you had a cigarette. When you sat down, you'd have a cigarette and put it in the ashtray, and you'd open your books and start your class, right? And so when I moved back over to the main areas where there's a lot of people, I remember seeing everybody with paved driveways and showers, and I was always amazed. And whenever anybody asked me how did I do in school, I would tell them, I came third in my class. And everybody like, that's pretty good. And I said, yeah, but there's only 3 of us. At least I come third in my class, so I don't normally tell people that there's only 3 of us. But seasonal variations in radiocesium concentrations will farming and rock farming in central Norway after the Chernobyl fallout. And I would go out in my little speedboat in the dead of winter in the North Atlantic Ocean. As soon as I get to the bottom of the harbour, there's 30-foot ground swells and this little 10-foot flat bottom. So it's hard to appreciate the skill I had at that age. But I would go out there with my .22 on the open ocean and shoot the little ducks and bluebirds and egg downs and whatever the order was from mom or dad that day to get, right, for food, and then come back and clean it all. So I grew up in a traditional life, right, where that was life to me. I didn't know any better. I thought that was life. And I had a charge account for beer. I shouldn't be talking about any of this, I suppose, but now you can imagine 13-year-old, I couldn't drink a beer, let alone 2 beer. And so when no one's paying attention, I would dump the beer up on my back. You just wanted to look the part, right? But I actually had a charge account for beer, charge account for cigarettes. And of course, it didn't take you long before you got sick of both of them. And it's all very innocent. You were treated like a man, and you felt like a man, and you didn't know you were still a child, right? And it was a very harsh life. And all the lines on my hands and my fingers were cracked wide open for 11 years. So every morning I would soak my hands so that and get my hands open enough so I can eat breakfast. It's a very tough life. And that's the good side of it. The sad side of it, I'm not going to bother telling you, but it was a very tough life. It was very innocent, but thank goodness, I have a different background than the average person because I appreciate life so much more than most people do. I appreciate the little things a lot more than most people can comprehend. And you had no TV and you had no radio. And so I was a voracious reader. And I didn't read like junk. I was only interested, and I was only given very educational books. Like I remember one of the books I read 4 times in just 1 year was a book about Martin Bormann. Martin Bormann was Hitler's financial advisor. He allegedly escaped to Germany with 6 submarines of gold and diamonds and everything else. And this was one of the reasons I became a commercial diver. Was I was looking for Davy Jones' locker, Martin Bormann's locker, so to speak. And the book was written by a special prosecutor who searched for Martin Bormann for 29 years, and he wrote a number of books about it. And books were basically the taxis, the hotels, the restaurants, like his expenses and stuff like that, and where he was traveling, the people he talked to. He kept a diary every day, and that was basically his book. There was ultimately it ended up in Paraguay. And so it was really weird. It was very for a child, it was a very weird book, right? Well, I read that 4 times in 1 year. That was one of the reasons, and I swore to become a commercial diver. Where I got thousands of hours as a commercial diver under my belt, right? Season variations in radiocesium concentrations in willow farming and rock farming, because that story just triggered all that. Science and trans science and radiation risk assessment. Child cancers around nuclear fuel reprocessing plants at Sellafield. The principle of which results may be extrapolated to humans are unknown. Uncertainties in the dosimetry of alpha emitting in children. What about gammas and neutrons and betas? And the fetuses are acute uncertainties. And chronic doubt persists over the magnitude of low-level dose response for radiation carcinogenesis. And this is 1986. And there was no way they weren't aware in 1986. Because in 1986, they closed 9,400 farms because of Chernobyl, right? In the United Kingdom, Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. The assessment of the health, what month was that? September. So they were quite aware. The assessments of health risk to the population from the radionuclides, or that came out just before Chernobyl, I guess. The assessment of health risk to the population from radionuclides in the environment is a complex as yet incomplete science. But it wasn't at all. And by 1986, they had millions and millions of academic studies. I'm going to go through a whole bunch tomorrow night, hundreds actually, of environmental transfer and concentrations are poorly understood. It's simply not true. They studied every facet of it many, many times each year pre-1986. But that's one of the main markers of the lies is where they suggest they don't know or is poorly understood. But it's 100% understood. And the details, the minutiae, we're going to go through that tomorrow night, the details, and just to give you an insight of why they're, I don't know how to put it. You got to go through it. You got to see it yourself to really comprehend it. And it's really fascinating stuff, actually. I'll try to put pictures in there because that kind of livens it up a bit. But it's very fascinating to see the studies they're doing. And then you realize the enormity of what you're dealing with, how it permeates through every facet of the ecosystem. Models of radionuclides metabolism rely largely on inconclusive, contradictory experiments with animals, and the principle by which the results may be extrapolated to humans are unknown. Again, that's simply not true. Uncertainties in dosimetry of alpha emitters. Well, what about gammas, neutrons, betas, X-rays? Why would you just look at alpha? To deny uncertainties of this nature is to court public distrust of scientific risk assessments. Public confidence in nuclear power technologies might be strengthened through a more open discussion of the technical difficulties involved. Should scientific concern persist over the exceptional incidences of child cancer in a locality, greater consideration should be given to the reappraisals of the risk calculations. Again, this is 1986 when they done that particular study. In 1986, they were 100% aware of all the details. Did I do that here, I wonder? Yeah. Let me. The first study is 19. The first study is 1996. Toxicity of inhaled plutonium dioxide in beagle dogs. I just want to give you an example. So this is your plutonium-238. It was a single inhalation. Now remember, my act, they got they had a half a sievert, which is a massive dose compared to these dogs. Many times more than these dogs. Death from radiation pneumonia occurred from 1.5 to 5.4 years. It was 144 beagle dogs and puppies. So tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver. So 3 tumors is what they basically found in each dog. All 144 dogs died. And the tumors began within 1.5 to 5.4 years after exposures. So not 10 years, not 20 years, 30 years down the road, but 1.5 to 5.4 years. Tumors of the lung, skeleton, and liver occurred beginning about 3 years after the exposures. Bone tumors were 93 dogs were the most common cause of death, which means you're mutating the stem cells too. Serious implications for the vulnerable of society, like the children and in particular and the elderly. Lung tumors found in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. So serious respiratory illnesses could be simply lung tumors, right? And liver tumors, which were found in 20 dogs, were the cause of death in only 2 dogs. So but they still had all these tumors. But the bone tumors killed most of them before the liver tumor killed them, or the bone tumor, or the lung tumor can kill them, rather. Tumors in 3 organs are often occurred in the same animal or competing causes of deaths. And they said that the finding in the dogs suggests that similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium-238. But the dog's kidneys, it was discovered, was 50 times less efficient. The human's kidneys is 50 times less efficient than a dog's kidneys at removing the plutonium, which means the human is 50 times more vulnerable than the dog was, and every dog died in the studies. But the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is not plutonium, it's curium isotopes. Curium isotopes are the major byproduct in radiated nuclear fuel. And when it comes to alpha emitters, they comprise a significant fraction. But they're the biggest byproduct in the irradiated fuel. It doesn't matter what emitter it is, it's the biggest byproduct. Curium needs lead shielding 20 times thicker than plutonium. And the plutonium killed all the dogs in all the studies with multiple tumors. And that the dogs, they say, suggest similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to the same is not true, because the dog is 50 times more efficient than a human is. Kidneys are at removing the plutonium. So the human is 50 times more vulnerable than the animal, and all the animals died in all the studies. The curium isotope, which needs lead shielding 20 times thicker than plutonium, is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod, not plutonium, not iodine-131, not cesium-137. Food for thought. Mortality and remember, Sellafield was a plutonium breeder reactor, not iodine-131 breeder reactor. It was a plutonium breeder reactor. And the biggest byproduct anyway is going to be the curium isotopes, not plutonium. But these are meant to help breed plutonium. How are we doing here? Holy crap. Where does the time go when you're having... Should Boris Johnson be charged with genocide for removing Fukushima baby food and cereal restrictions? Like, he done that 2.5 years before he removed the restrictions for the rest of the population. The first restrictions were removed for baby food and cereal for children in the United Kingdom. That's a genocide. That's on purpose. That was on purpose. That was the preamble to the genocide that we see happening now. Mortalities in Cumbria during 1959-78 with references to cancer in young people around Windscale. The Atlas of Cancer Mortalities for England. Well, let me go backwards because it's not shown. I'll put it on the bigger screen just for a few minutes. Because sometimes my full screen, I don't know. I don't know what it looks like on your end, but sometimes I'm missing some of the letters to the side. Atlas of Cancer Mortality from England and Wales. Case control study on childhood cancer in the vicinity of nuclear power plants in Germany. So, like, they were doing all these studies, I noticed. Cancer mortalities around French nuclear sites, German nuclear sites, United Kingdom nuclear sites. And the reason they're doing these studies, not only talking about cancers, but there's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. There's autism, dementia, and Down syndrome, diabetes. There's many other illnesses, not just cancer. And if you fall, and that's what they're doing to you in all these studies: cancer. And there's many different types of cancer, and cancer is definitely important. But you got to realize there's many other catastrophic illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses that'll manifest typically before the cancer does, and doesn't get any prominence. Cancer. An overview of reports and current, because you do research on, you got to, like, if you're going to do, after a nuclear accident, the first studies are Down syndrome and autism. right? That's the very first studies they're going to do. Yeah, they're going to do all kinds of other ones too. But the first studies on the table is going to be autism and Down syndrome, because they know that's going to permeate throughout the population, and that's going to be, then they can do sex ratio studies. And the reason they do the sex ratio studies is because they're looking for the discrepancy between males and females. If there's more males than females, that quantifies the mass poisoning. But it also, with that, then you got less population because you got more males than females. And if you're going to have it in the human population, it's going to be 1,000-fold in the species, because they're 1,000 times more vulnerable than a human is, if not even more. An overview of reports and current research concerning childhood leukemias and cancers around nuclear installations in the United Kingdom and around Sellafield / Windscale. The cancer clusters right alongside of it, you can look at your window and see it any time of the day or night. They were blaming that on the common flu. Right? We've covered that study many times. I don't think I got it here tonight, but we've covered it many, many times, right? I'll have it for the anniversary, that's for sure. But the academics were doing studies. Can you imagine how evil you got to be to do a study saying leukemia clusters right alongside a nuclear reprocessing site wasn't caused by the nuclear reprocessing? No. And in fact, what they say is there was absolutely no harm ever from a nuclear site to the population, which is now we know is impossible. It's 100% impossible to have that statistic. It simply can't exist. An overview of reports and current research concerning childhood leukemias and cancers around nuclear installations. The cluster in C-scale, the village closest to Sellafield reprocessing plant, may be the results of germ cell mutation in the fathers of the affected children. Germ cell mutation in the fathers of the affected children. Not from radioactive fallout. It has to be something else. Can't be radioactive fallout. Because it is, then you got to move everybody out, right? And you might have to compensate everybody's families. They got loved ones in the graveyards. However, the results of the studies are inconsistent. The cause of the cancer of the parent increases are unknown. Of course, then they'll retract that many other ways too, right? They'll do but this and but that. And anything to downplay the harm. Childhood leukemia around nuclear facilities, a commentary. Cancer near 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. There's cancer maps after 3 Mile Island. There's a huge amount of deaths of the pets that got left behind. The whole 3 Mile Island, and you can find presentations on my site about 3 Mile Island, was absurd to cover up there. It just shows you the industry shouldn't be allowed to exist. Everybody in it should lose their degree by default, because their legacy can only be evil. There can't be any redeeming qualities to it. Radio frequency exposure in a neonatal medium care unit. So just radio frequency exposures. Right? In a neonatal, the newborns, young underdeveloped or premature newborns. And what they were showing was an urgent need for more research, because there's a lot of wireless frequencies going through these areas, and they're damaging the infants. Unbelievable, eh? And so when you bring a newborn home and you've got cell phones, you've got wireless routers from your neighbors, and the list goes very long. Your mobile 2.4 gigahertz or 5.8 gigahertz phones, and you got you even got to worry about radiation from your microwave oven. And microwave oven destroys about 84% of the nutrition in your food. So what's the point of having it in your house, eh? And people are very, oh no, well, it's convenient, right? And it's like, no, it destroys 80% of nutrition in your food. Yeah, but it's pretty convenient. And you're like, whatever, like. But the reality of it is, it won't penetrate their heads. They're like, no, well, I like it, right? But it's so bad. Why are you doing it? Well, I like it, but it's bad. Nah, not bad. But actually it is, yeah. You can pretend it's not, but it is. And you're only hurting yourself by doing it. And it's the cause of many health problems when you do it. No, they wouldn't let it in my house if it was, Dana. And you can't help everybody. But it worries you when you see people with that attitude, right? Not willing to have a conversation, you know. Considering newborns' vulnerability, it is wise to adopt a prudent avoidance strategy. Science and trans science and radiation risk assessment. Child cancers around nuclear fuel reprocessing plants at Sellafield. Long-term retentions of particles in the human respiratory tract. 12 healthy, non-smoking male volunteers inhaled monodispersal 1 to 4 microsieverts, or 1 to 4 diameter fused particles labeled strontium-85 and tritium-88 respectively. And they found that it was retained there for a very long time. The risk of leukemia in young children from exposures to tritium and carbon-14. I think this is a Springer. The 3 biggest journals are Springer, Wiley, and my brain has gone flat again. The study found a tendency for cases of leukemias to live closer to the nearest nuclear power station than their matched control, producing odd ratios that was raised to statistically significant extent for residents within 5 kilometers of a nuclear power station. So if you're within 5 kilometers of a nuclear disease factory, it's time to move away. Well, if you're within 100 miles of it, you're going to see an explosion of heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. And if you don't take the hint, then you're making a mistake. 6 times more breast cancer within 15 miles of a nuclear plant. And one of the things I used to say to people, because you couldn't get them to listen to you, right? You would say that to them, right? So did you know there was, I know a friend of mine had 6 daughters, right? And you couldn't talk to them about radiation, just couldn't penetrate the kind of, couldn't get them to respond. And so I said to him, within 15 miles of a nuclear plant, there's 6 times more breast cancer. Would you live now knowing that within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant with your 6 daughters? And he looked at me and said, no. Jesus. Wow. It's like that got his attention. Because that was something that related to it, right? He had 6 daughters. Like, wait, what? Jesus, there's no nuclear plants around here. Is it Dana? I'm like, no, you're okay. I said, hello, I'm Dana. Who are you? Just like his whole world just changed instantly. He's like, tell me more. I said, well, careful of the cereal you're eating. Risk of childhood leukemia after low-level exposures to ionizing radiation. Risk of childhood leukemia after low-level. 11 becquerels, 11 atoms per kilogram. You can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. And anthropogenic man-made atoms, you can't see it. So how are you going to determine 11? It cause permanent heart problems. 50 will cause permanent lesions to an adult's organ or an animal's organs. And so there's studies based on studies of Japanese survival of atomic bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But that study is based on external doses only. So risk of childhood leukemia after low-level exposures to ionizing radiation is external doses. And that the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were denied, until 2 years ago, health care for 74 years. Denied health care because he said there wasn't enough radiation and man-made radiation to cause any harm. And that the studies, and one of the people in charge currently in charge is Dr. Geraldine Thomas from the United Kingdom, who goes around telling people it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine. And I'm not going to get through everything I got tonight. I just got too much. And so then they downplay it, and then they play it back up, then they downplay it, then they play it back up. Evidence from studies of low-level exposure is not abundant, but it actually is. It really, really is. And then when you look at the references, United Nations Scientific Committee on Effective Radiation. So anything to do with United Nations, if you're smart, you'll disregard it. They're disgusting. They're truly parasitically disgusting. Never trust anything from United Nations, period. There's literally no credibility. Incidences of childhood cancer in West Cumbria. Evidence of childhood leukemia around nuclear power plants. Reports of increased numbers of leukemia cases, clusters, in children living in the vicinities of nuclear power plants and other nuclear installations have triggered a heated debate over the possible causes of the diseases. What do you mean, possible causes? It has to be something else. It can't be nuclear, see? It has to be. Okay, so we got some pictures we're going to get through. We raised $460. James Lucid, maniac, donated $460, and that got us our 2 batteries, which I got to admit I'm quite proud to have. Finally, it's unbelievable relief to say the least. And so I got some pictures from last week. I'm gonna walk you through, and then pictures of Friday. Or Saturday to walk you through when we picked up the batteries. Let's get through that stuff. I'll come in and close the poll after. That picture shouldn't be there. That's the winch on the back of the quad. And what I'd done was I bought a cheap, it was on sale, 8,000 pound, 4,000 pound pulley. And I mounted it just by ropes up above the bike to pull up the box scraper, right? And that thing is amazing. And so when you see the snow, look, everything is buried. Like the plow didn't come up there for 2 full days. I was trying just to dig out my little area. It was unbelievable. Now, I had been doing it for 4 or 5 days. So if I didn't do it, it would have been probably 6-7 feet deep right there. But that road, you can't even walk on that road. It's completely gone. So this was last weekend that I went in and picked up a bunch of more equipment. And there are the E-tracks for my 16-foot flat deck trailer. So I picked up the Clevis pin hitches because you got to realize how big of an operation I got and what I need. And this was, I got this for dirt. Everything I get on sale, right? This was dirt cheap, and I found right away I solved one of my problems with the trailer wires. I got this 240-piece nut and bolt, stainless steel nut and bolt on sale. It was $9 or something. I got these guys for $6 because I got so much equipment trying to keep it clean is a nightmare. And they go on my drill, right, or the compressor tools, so that's really handy. The electric hot knife, they're always too expensive to justify, right? But they're on sale for $36. And so I finally got one. And they're for cutting plastic. And you can also fix plastic, right? And if anybody knows how hard it is to fix plastic, and I got so many things broken with plastic, so I'm starting to fix things now, finally. That's what it looks like, right? And it's fantastic. I got to admit, that thing is, for the price, my goodness. Then I got trailer wire. Typically, that's $20-something. I got it for $11. And that's going to be, I need 2 packs of that. I only bought one. I need one for each side of the trailers, and I got 2 trailers that I need to do it to. to put lights on the side of it, clearance, what they call clearance lights. And so when you're backing up, or at nighttime you're into a tight spot, it illuminates both sides of the trailers. And also when you drive, less chance of getting broadsided and stuff like that. And so I'm slowly building that. So I got all of these on sale for $7 each. And I've been buying them piece by piece when they're on sale. So I got 14 of them, ratchets, and they clip into the E-tracks. And I got them for $7 each or something, which is less than half the price, otherwise I wouldn't bother one, right? But they clip into these tracks, and these are the 2-foot lengths. So an 8-foot is $50, but these are $32 if you buy it in 2-foot lengths when it was on sale. And that set is for the quads and the trailer's wheels on the trailer. And so they go in front, and I'll cut them in two, and they go in front and behind each wheel. And then I can use these to bolt the wheels down. So it's a more secured load that way, right? It's fantastic and easy and quick to do. I should have bought like 6 cans of this stuff. If I had my time back, I would have bought 6 cans. That's a blaster for rust. And I picked up a lot of supplies to deal with the rust this spring. I got a lot of work to do, maintenance. Because I really do got a big operation. It's hard to comprehend it. And so I went through 100 of those screws on the other stuff of these, because you can see how many holes they got right to bolt down. So I just picked up another 100. That's why that picture is there. That should show up. I put a winch on the boat last weekend. That's a 2,000-pound winch. The winch I had on it before was 800 pounds. It was a disaster. And so I got that for a few months ago for $36, which is really cheap for a 2,000-pound 2-speed winch. And it's a reverse too, right? So it's actually a really nice winch. This is the pictures from yesterday. So that's the 2 batteries. And I got the big batteries. I didn't, because James Lucid donated 460. And there should be a little video there of this stuff. And then I bought the ropes. I'll show you pictures of that. That was Princess Auto. We got some great deals at Princess Auto. All right, so $620. We got our batteries. Thank you, James. And we got the ropes and the tie downs for the batteries, a cutoff switch. We needed those nuts and bolts. So we bought the better battery, the deep cycle one, with 180-minute reserve. And I got 2 of them, obviously, right? So totally, I'm actually in shock that I got them, believe it or not. And of course, what do I do yesterday afternoon when I get home? I stick both of them on the charger right away, like a big child. No, because I should have changed my batteries last year, but we had so many breakdowns and problems and issues and expenses. We just couldn't get it done, right? And so last year I used to have to use 24 volt to start the outboard motor. And the outboard motor's got a really good alternator on it because I rebuilt it the year before. And the starting motor the year before that. So that's pretty cool. We got that. About another 172 piece nuts and bolts. Then about another 100 of those leg bolts for the E-tracks. Hopefully that'll be enough. They were $20 or something. They weren't on sale, but I needed them. Then I bought a battery cutoff switch, and I'm using that to find the drain in my battery. It's a good way to do it. Just $12, but it's worth it. And the battery braces, I put one on the truck today. I had to retap it. I had to cut it off and retap it for one side because it's really short on one side and only goes down so far. So I've got them $10 each or something. And I just love these things. You got double braided 20-foot lengths, 1.5 inch each tie-up lines for the boat. because I've been using that really thin stuff, and when you wrap that around your hand and you're trying to stop the boat, it hurts. And so I'm excited to actually, and they already got the eyes spliced into them. I can splice it anyway, but the double braid is a little bit more trickier, but it's not that hard. So now I got a total of 400 nuts and bolts, stainless steel nuts and bolts. I'll bet you I'll go through every one of them before the summer's out. And that's with the big operation I got, you can't do it without that, right? And then the big C-clamp, C-hook, that's a big one, eh? That's size of your palm, your whole hand, for $3. And I should have bought 3 of them, but it ended up being $620 before I got out the door. That is okay, because it was on everything except for one piece there was on sale. And the battery cutoff switch, I got lots of uses for that. And so the batteries are for the Zodiac, just for anybody who's not familiar, because the batteries in the Zodiac are 5 years old, and last year was pretty sketchy. There's I made 18 trips last year, right, on the ocean, but we're going out in the water. We'll be out in the water next weekend, hopefully. And what I mean by that is the weather permitting, of course, right? If we get another snowfall, I still got to get a permit for the lunch. That's $70. Do that later the week. Still got to fuel up the boat. Just get a couple of 5-gallon jerry cans. Because all I do is I mosey around at 5, 6, 7 kilometers an hour. And I'm usually out for 6, 7 hours at a time. And we want to get out there for the eclipse, too, this year. All right, we made it through. And then Stephen Young donated, I noticed, $50 tonight. And I worry about Stephen because he's getting this infusions right now. And it's very difficult on him. And it's very expensive, I'm sure, right, to do the things he's doing. And he's been crippled, I guess, like severely debilitated, I should say, for must be 3 years now. Or longer. And there's got to be a financial strain on him. So, again, Stephen's been around a long time, a very close friend. Him and his loved ones, our heart goes out and hopes everything turns out for the better. So does most people. Most people do know Stephen in the comments section, right? You'll see him there, but he's called into the shows a couple of times in the last month and a half or so, just to give us updates. We appreciate that. Should Boris Johnson be charged with genocide for removing Fukushima baby food and cereal restrictions? Well, absolutely. And we got 48 votes with an overwhelming. A couple of people accidentally voted no. That happens. We know you meant to vote yes. So, and that takes us up to. So it's 2 hours and 12 minutes or so. I guess we can call it quits, can we? Thanks for everybody. Have a great night, everybody. I hope everybody had a great day, great weekend. Extra hugs for James and Stephen for being able to help. Yeah, and so it was great prices on all of this. I got a tendency to, because I'm stocking up to try not to have any downtime this year or next year, right? And my fleet is getting old, and I got to do everything myself. And I'm trying to keep everything working because I can't afford to replace anything anymore. As you probably all know by now, it's quite the struggle to keep everything moving forward. Yeah, I shouldn't put batteries on cement, that's true. Good point. Okay, good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. If anybody wants to contribute, you'll find the links in the bottom of the description directly to my PayPal and directly to my website. It's really easy. Never had an issue. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we're going to be covering studies on Chernobyl, different facets from different countries too, about Chernobyl. and and it really give you a really great insight into how crazy nuclear really is, how dangerous just a typical running plant actually is. Have a great night, everybody. See everybody soon. Take care.